Ms. Magill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking, specifically calling for the genocide of Jews, does that constitute bullying or harassment?
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context.
If the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide?
One day later.
I want to be clear. A call for genocide of Jewish people is threatening, deeply so. In my view, it would be harassment or intimidation.
Man, oh man, it has been a tough week for higher education, starting with those congressional testimonies, then the resignation of Penn President Liz Magill, and now, of course, with the campaigns for the Harvard and MIT presidents to be next. Many people, when analyzing these university presidents' statements, have been zeroing in on the moral rot that their testimonies laid bare. That such unimpressive and frankly unprincipled people are now leading these schools. And how sad it is that we're even in this situation in the first place, where heads of universities have to go before Congress to explain this Jew hatred on their campuses. But in addition to the moral issues that this moment has illuminated, there are also legal issues, specifically about free speech. And these testimonies raised very interesting questions that we Americans have to objectively consider, such as, does the First Amendment allow you to call for genocide? Does chanting intifada constitute bullying and harassment? Should you be allowed to call for genocide or chant intifada? I'm no expert, but I do know a thing or two about constitutional law, and we'll explore these questions together today. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Hey everyone, and welcome to Timeless. I hope that all of you are doing better than Penn President Liz Magill is doing right now, or Harvard President Claudine Gay, or MIT President Sally Kornbluth, or really any leader in higher education, because let me tell you, they are having a bad week, but they also had it coming for them. That is just to say, welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're here, and as always, it's great to be with you. Just a reminder to please hit the subscribe button down below if you like what you see and you want to be notified with every new piece of content that I post. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Julie R. Hartman. Starting right now, we are going to leave our emotions and our disgust at the door, and we're going to enter into a room of an objective discussion and exploration of issues about free speech. Because if there's one thing that the past 2 months has made clear, it's that we live in a country where there are a lot of scummy people. But we also live in a country where those scummy people are allowed to be scummy, and they are also allowed to say scummy things and be protected. The question of this episode today, and the question of the congressional hearing, or at least what the congressional hearing was supposed to answer, is where is that bright red line with regard to speech that you cannot cross, where now your speech is punishable? And interestingly, in that congressional hearing, Elise Stefanik, the questioner in that video that you saw, and the university presidents were talking about two different realms of speech, but they were talking past each other. Elise Stefanik, if you notice, was asking each of those university presidents about their university's policies. she phrased each question in a very similar way. When she was addressing Sally Kornbluth, Liz Magill, and Claudine Gay, she said, "Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your university's policies about bullying and harassment?" So that was one side of it. And then interestingly, these university presidents were answering with these kind of constitutional or First Amendment arguments, which is so ridiculous because these universities' policies with regard to free speech are not constitutional or First Amendment policies. All of us as Americans are protected by the First Amendment, but we're also subject to certain restrictions under the First Amendment, which we're going to get to in just a few moments. But since Harvard, MIT, and Penn are private institutions, they are allowed to establish speech codes. Because the way the First Amendment is worded is it says that nor shall Congress make any law abridging freedom of speech. In other words, the First Amendment prohibits the government from infringing on your right to speak. But private institutions are not the government. Private institutions can do whatever they want. And as we know, Harvard, Penn, MIT, and many of these other private institutions have speech codes, which are called bullying and harassment policies. So it was just kind of interesting. And some would say a cop-out for these university presidents to be trying to invoke a First Amendment constitutional argument when A, that's not true, and B, that was not the question that Elise Stefanik was asking of them. But both of these realms of speech are really important for us to understand. So we're going to look at both of them right now, starting with what does the First Amendment say about all of this? What is the bright red line that our Constitution and our courts have established with regard to free speech? And then we're going to look at what do these university policies say about what kind of speech constitutes bullying and harassment? So let's explore these, starting with the First Amendment. The First Amendment, as I just said a few moments ago, ensures Americans' right to freedom of speech, but the Supreme Court has established certain circumstances in which your speech is not protected. So what are those circumstances? Well, the most recent court case which set forth a standard is called Brandenburg versus Ohio. This was passed down by the court in 1969. This set up the existing standard for what that line is with regard to your First Amendment rights. I'm reading here from the Middle Tennessee State University. You know why I'm citing that my source? Because I don't want to be like Claudine Gay and read from things without quotation marks and without giving my proper citation here. So this is from Middle Tennessee State University. Brandenburg versus Ohio established that speech advocating illegal conduct is protected under the First Amendment, unless that speech is likely to incite imminent lawless violence, okay? So I'm going to repeat that one more time. You can basically advocate for something illegal, but then your speech, and that is protected by the First Amendment, but your speech is not protected once it is deemed as something that is likely to incite imminent lawless action. Now, there are many conservatives who are free speech absolutists, and they invoke the argument that you should basically be allowed to say whatever you want, even if what you are saying is likely to incite imminent lawless violence. They say that we now live in this world where silence is called violence and speech is called violence. And they say, you know what? We really have to be careful about our distinctions. Silence is not violence. Violence is violence. Speech is not violence. Violence is violence. So those free speech absolutists would say that your actions should be punished, not anything you ever say with your words. But whether or not we agree with the Supreme Court's standard that they established in Brandenburg v. Ohio, that is the standard. That is our law. So we have to know that law and proceed forward. Let me give an example to really kind of make this more clear, because it's very tricky and again, this is the whole point of the episode, to explore where these lines are. It's very tricky to figure out what exactly constitutes something that is likely to incite imminent lawless violence. But here's the best example I can give. You can advocate for something illegal and morally reprehensible. So for instance, I am technically allowed to say, you know what, Sean? I think that people should be allowed to murder. I don't agree with the United States of America's laws about homicide. If someone slights you, eye for an eye. You should be allowed to murder them. Now, that is advocating for something illegal. It's also advocating for something morally reprehensible. But I am allowed to say that until my speech crosses over into something like this. Until I say, you know what, Sean, not only do I think that you should be allowed to murder, why don't you go pick up that knife and go stab Rick? That, according to the Brandenburg, Rick's looking at me like, why? Why? Well, Sean wouldn't be allowed to say that, or I wouldn't be allowed to say that, Rick. I'd be thrown in jail or at least punished in another way, according to our court. But you see that line, because the first one is just kind of in the ether, advocating for murder. And then the second thing is something that is likely to incite imminent lawless action, okay? So now that we understand this standard, let's turn and look at some of these chants that are being said on colleges and universities. Elise Stefanik, when she was questioning these university heads, she was using the word genocide. And some people are saying, including Heather McDonald, by the way, who wrote an excellent article in the City Journal about this, some people are saying that that word was not fair for Elise Stefanik to use, because we have not, up until this point, to my knowledge, and I could be wrong, heard people using the G word, genocide. We've heard people chanting intifada, but chanting intifada is different than chanting or calling for genocide. In fact, there was an exchange during this congressional testimony when the MIT president, Sally Kornbluth, actually said to Elise Stefanik, I have not heard calls for genocide. Let's look at this exchange, clip 1.5.
Calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment,
I have not heard calling for the genocide for Jews on our campus.
but you've heard chants for intifada.
But there's a difference between those two. Obviously, neither are okay. Both are morally reprehensible. But again, we're going to put our emotions and our disgust aside. We left that at the door a few minutes ago. Now we're in the realm of objective discussion. And we have to acknowledge that there is a difference between those two. Let's look, though, at what intifada means, okay? So intifada is a word which in Arabic translates to uprising and shaking off. It also refers to something historical. That is, years in Israeli history where the first and second intifadas were taking place. The first intifada was from 1987 to 1993, and the second intifada was from the year 2000 to roughly 2005. And these were horrible periods of unspeakable, frequent violence all over the state of Israel by Palestinian terrorists. They would go to bus stops and blow up bus stops, blow up pizza parlors, go and shoot people, stab people. So when people are chanting intifada, they are chanting a term which refers to historically a period of intense violence. And again, even the translation of that word, which means uprising or shaking off, it's not referring to something particularly peaceful. But again, there is a difference between the word genocide, the G word, and intifada. And the chanting intifada is more legally ambiguous than chanting genocide, okay? So here are now that we kind of understand these standards and the history of the word intifada, let's look at the two different arguments of what people are saying about this. Does chanting intifada constitute something that is likely to incite imminent lawless violence? That is the standard established under Brandenburg. So there's one group of people who say the following, that Chanting intifada, and especially when you put a verb in front of it, as we are hearing on these college campuses, people are saying globalize the intifada, or they're saying, this is not a verb, but nevertheless, it's sort of a call to action. They're saying one solution intifada. People in this camp argue, wait a minute, that is something that is likely to incite imminent lawless action. Why? Because it would be one thing if these students were chanting, F the Jews, or F Zionism, or F the state of Israel. Jews are dogs, Jews are pigs. And by the way, we are hearing those chants and those calls, which is despicable. But that is one realm of speech. This is, again, what individuals in this camp would argue. That is one realm of speech. But once you cross over and you start chanting intifada, which again, in Arabic translates to shaking off, uprising, and it refers to historical periods of violence, they say that is actionable, because now you are crossing into something where you are calling for violence to take place. And also, we have seen on these college campuses and at these universities that these chants are not just happening in the, in everyday life and the chants just kind of stop there. We are seeing that it is starting to bleed over into action. Let's watch a testimony that was delivered by a University of Pennsylvania student before Congress talking about how it has crossed over into lawlessness.
Because 36 hours ago, I, along with most of campus, sought refuge in our rooms, as classmates and professors chanted proudly for the genocide of Jews while igniting smoke bombs and defacing school property.
Okay, when people are igniting smoke bombs and defacing property as they are chanting intifada, what they are doing is that they are indicating that they are wanting to, and not only wanting, are indeed doing things that are violent. But again, we have to be really specific. Defacing school property and letting smoke bombs go off is different than going after a Jewish student and committing violence against them. But again, to kind of oscillate back and forth, when you're igniting smoke bombs and you're defacing property, you are going right up to the edge. And the next step is that it's not going to be property, it's going to be a human being. And in fact, we saw a despicable instance of this on Harvard's campus, where people were crowding around and trying to block a Jewish student from walking to class and chanting shame at this Jewish student. Let's watch that clip. Okay, so this is one camp of people who are saying the chant for intifada is referring to something violent that is different than just expressing Jew hatred or dislike of Jews, that is calling for something that is likely to incite imminent lawless action. And we see that there have been times where it has bled over into action, or it's gotten really, really damn close to action. That's one group of people. Another group of people say this: as morally reprehensible as it is to chant intifada, chanting intifada is not likely to incite imminent lawless action. Why? Well, these individuals would say because we have seen that it is chanted a lot on colleges and universities, and very, very rarely, if ever, does it cross over into someone beating up or killing or severely, violently harming a Jewish student. So they would say that the standard established by Brandenburg versus Ohio is not could chanting into intifada incite imminent lawless action. The standard is it likely to incite imminent lawless action? And they would say, well, we've seen it chanted a lot of times and it has not done so. So it is not likely to incite imminent lawless action. And also, to highlight another word in that, I guess 5-word, is it likely to incite imminent lawless action? Oh, I guess it's 6 words, forgive me. History major, not a math major. But other people say that there's another really important word in that 6-word standard, in addition to likely. It is the word imminent. And these individuals would argue that chanting intifada certainly makes long-term violence more probable. because you're calling for something to happen. Globalize the intifada, one solution intifada. But these individuals would say that doesn't constitute an imminent threat, because chanting globalize the intifada is very different from chanting let's go to the Hallel and kill the rabbi. So all of that being said, now this First Amendment standard is very tricky, and we have to, though, really understand it in order to have these different debates about it. As I said, though, it is so interesting and ridiculous, honestly, and intellectually dishonest that these university presidents were trying to act like this was their standard on their campuses, that they just follow the Brandenburg versus Ohio policy. In fact, in the day later, as you saw in the little opening montage, I put in a SpongeBob thing, one day later, we see that right after the congressional testimonies, Liz Magill knew that her job was about to be taken away from her. And so she issued this video, which was sort of her mea culpa moment, where she was trying to explain herself. And in the first 20 seconds of the video, she argues that she was just trying to follow Penn's policies, which are in line with the Constitution. Here she is saying this.
There was a moment during yesterday's congressional hearing on anti-Semitism when I was asked if a call for the genocide of Jewish people on our campus would violate our policies. In that moment, I was focused on our university's longstanding policies aligned with the US Constitution, which say that speech alone is not punishable.
Okay, that is dishonest. Your university policies are not in line with the United States Constitution. That's problem one. And then problem one is the dishonesty. Problem two is that in trying to explain this constitutional standard, in their attempt, all three of these presidents' attempts before Congress to make a First Amendment argument, they actually failed at accurately explaining that Brandenburg standard. Let's listen to what Liz Magill said the day before on Capitol Hill.
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
Okay, do you know how ridiculous that statement is? That statement will actually go down as one of the most asinine things to be ever uttered by a university president. We are not debating when speech becomes action. I would hope, former President Liz Magill, that we would all agree that once speech becomes action, it is not only harassment, it is a crime. The whole point of the hearing is not to talk about action. The point of the hearing is to talk about speech. Up until what point is speech acceptable to you at your university? Harvard President Claudine Gay had a similarly asinine statement.
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
Yes, again, I would hope that when action is action, you will take action. But the whole point of the hearing is to try to establish up until what point before action is speech acceptable. And we see here that they're trying to make a Brandenburg versus Ohio First Amendment free speech argument, but they failed at even accurately conveying that. Because the Brandenburg standard is not that speech is okay until it crosses into action. The Brandenburg standard is speech is okay until it is something that is likely to incite imminent lawless action. It does not speak well for the state of higher education that these leaders, even these leaders who have law degrees, like in the case of President Liz Magill, are unable to even accurately summarize what the standard is on free speech. Okay, so now we're going to look at the schools' bullying and harassment policies, because that was the whole question after all. It wasn't, please give a free speech argument. It was, what does your university with your speech codes say about calling for the genocide of Jews? Does that constitute bullying and harassment, or not. But before we get to that, I would like to quickly tell you about MyPillow. I use many MyPillow products. I walk into work wearing my slippers, and then at the last minute I change into heels. I sleep on a MyPillow, and I use my towels. And you can get many of these products too at a discount with the promo code Hartman. And right now, MyPillow is bringing their biggest bedding sale ever, just in time for Christmas. Get the Giza Dream bed sheets, which by the way, I also sleep on. They're fantastic, for as low as $29.98. A set of pillowcases for only $9.98. Rejuvenate your bed with a MyPillow mattress topper for as low as $99.99. They also have blankets in a variety of sizes, colors, and styles. They even have blankets for your pets. Get duvets, quilts, down comforters, body pillows, bolster pillows, and so much more, all with the biggest discounts ever. They're also extending their money-back guarantee for Christmas until March 1st, 2024, making these the perfect gifts for your friends, your family, and everyone you know. So go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Hartman, or call 1-800-566-6745. And you guessed it, use the promo code Hartman and you'll get big discounts on all MyPillow bedding products, including the Giza Dream bed sheets for as low as $29.98. Get all your shopping done now while quantities last. Okay, so now let's look at the university speech codes and university policies. You know, if Julie Hartman were running Harvard University, Julie Hartman would do a lot of different things, let me tell you. But the first thing that I would do is establish that speech on this campus will be handled in the same way that our First Amendment and our Constitution, our Bill of Rights specifically, handles speech. And that is, I would establish the policy that says, if the First Amendment protects it, we, Harvard University, will protect it. If the First Amendment doesn't protect it, we, Harvard University, won't protect it. Clean, easy, simple, principled, effective. But the problem is, that is not their standard, even though they were pretending like it was on Capitol Hill. They have established speech codes called bullying and harassment codes. So we're going to look right now at the way that Harvard defines harassment, discriminatory harassment, and bullying. I'm specifically looking at Harvard because I spent a lot of time combing through their many documents and pulled these out, and also because the way that they phrase or define these terms is very similar, not the same, but very similar to the way that the University of Pennsylvania and MIT define these terms. So let's look now at the Harvard Student Handbook from the year 2023 to 2024. When I was a student at Harvard, I never read the Harvard Student Handbook, but now that I'm an alum with my own talk show, I was spending my whole weekend combing through it. This is on page 53. This is how they define harassment. This is picture 6 for my producers. Harassment. It is implicit in the language of the Statement on Rights and Responsibilities that intense personal harassment of such a character as to amount to grave disrespect for the dignity of others be regarded as an unacceptable violation of the personal rights on which the university is based. So really, there's a few words there, 6 words if I counted correctly, that matter. Grave disrespect for the dignity of others. Okay, it was 7 words. That's how they define it. Harassment is grave disrespect for the dignity of others, according to the Harvard Student Handbook. Okay, now let's look at how Harvard defines discriminatory harassment. This was on the Harvard Graduate School of Arts and Sciences website, which is different, of course, from the undergraduate school, but they have Harvard University policies, and the university encompasses not just the college, but the graduate school, law school, business school, design school, etc. Okay? So this is a really, really long paragraph, but I'll just cut right to the important part. Discriminatory harassment is something that is, ... or I inserted the word as something that is, but is something that is, quote, so severe or pervasive and objectively offensive that it creates a work, educational, or living environment that a reasonable person would consider intimidating, hostile, or abusive, and denies the individual an equal opportunity to participate in the benefits of the workplace or the institution's programs and activities. We recently saw on Harvard's campuses videos of students going into lecture halls with bullhorns and disrupting class. Now, these students weren't necessarily chanting intifada. The video that I saw has a student yelling, free Palestine, ceasefire, stop the violence. But still, looking at that example, that definition that Harvard has of discriminatory harassment, the final thing there says that it constitutes discriminatory harassment if you are denying equal opportunity for students to participate in the institution's programs and activities. Walking into class with a bullhorn is certainly interfering with students' ability to equally participate in the institution's programs and activities. And then finally, here is Harvard University's definition of bullying, which, by the way, they established in the past year. They just rewrote this, okay? This is picture 8. Bullying, they say, is harmful interpersonal aggression by words or actions that humiliate, degrade, demean, intimidate, or threaten an individual or individuals. Let's go back to that brave University of Pennsylvania senior who testified before Congress and hear about his experience, and let's contemplate if you think what he went through fits these definitions of bullying and harassment.
Because the glorious October 7th, and you're a dirty little Jew, you deserve to die, are words said not by Hamas, but by my classmates and professors. For the past 3 weeks inside Houston Hall, our student center, an anti-Semitic headquarters has been erected with signs spreading Hamas propaganda. The organizers, both Penn affiliated and not, were initially asked to leave as they are trespassing on campus property. Well, 3 weeks later, they are still sleeping there, and countless Jewish students have been harassed, yet the anti-Semitic dormitory remains.
I will leave it up to your discretion if you think that testimony constitutes bullying and harassment. And again, I just want to make clear that the last 3 definitions that I read are from Harvard, but I looked at both the University of Pennsylvania and MIT's policies about discriminatory harassment, and bullying, and they are very, very similar. In Julie Hartman world, again, if I were running these universities, I would really get rid of a lot of these bullying and harassment codes. Not that I don't think that things constitute bullying and harassment, but the problem is if we look at these definitions, they are so broad that they really are left up to one's subjective interpretation. For instance, looking at this definition of bullying, harmful aggression by words that humiliate, degrade, demean, intimidate, or threaten an individual. A lot of people would look at that and say that the assertion that there are only 2 genders would be harmful aggression by words that degrade and demean transgender students, and thus that statement should constitute bullying. And that's the problem, because you can read into it whatever you want. However, we are in a different stratosphere now, where we have Jewish students who are afraid to leave their rooms because there is such a hostile environment, which has crossed over into action, defacing school property, putting off smoke bombs. In the case of the Harvard University student, going around that student and preventing him from going to class. So we have crossed into different territory. And also, and this is the point of the episode, this is the most damning, glaring thing I will say in the entire time that we have here together. If Harvard and Penn and MIT are going to say, as they do, that misgendering someone constitutes bullying and harassment, they better damn say that chanting intifada and chanting glory to October 7th also constitutes bullying and harassment. And this is the problem, that there is a sick double standard with what they punish and what they don't punish. Let us look at some examples. Harvard, by the way, I am so going out of my way to cite all of my sources because of Claudine Gay and all of the fire that she's under. This is something that I got from Barry Weiss's The Free Press, who's done an amazing expose on the double standard of these universities. Harvard told students in a mandatory training session that using the wrong pronouns constitutes abuse. They also have told students that sizeism, fat phobia, cis heterosexualism, ableism are all, quote, attitudes that contribute to an environment that perpetuates violence. How sick that they say that, and then they're sitting before Congress, and Elise Stefanik says, does calling for the genocide of Jews, or does, if she should have been more accurate, does chanting intifada constitute bullying and harassment? The fact that they said it is a context-dependent decision when they have punished other things which are so much more minor, it's really unbelievable. That's an example from Harvard. The University of Pennsylvania this year, 2023, had seminars on deconstructing whiteness, maintaining an inclusive community, campus, climate, and retention. Okay, so these universities are so zeroed in on deconstructing whiteness, making sure that they are, going after any semblance of racism or anti-minority bigotry. But then we see the president's mealy-mouthed answers when they were asked about these horrible calls for the Jewish people. Amy Wax, these are more examples of the double standard, was a University of Pennsylvania law professor who in 2018 was barred by the University of Pennsylvania from teaching a freshman class because she dared to make the statement that, quote, Black students rarely finish in the top half of their graduating class. And then another example also from the Free Press. Thank you, Free Press, for diving into this. In 2021, MIT canceled a major lecture about climate change by this lecturer, Dorian Abbott, because graduate students were upset at him for making the, again, horribly bigoted argument that hiring should be based on merit and not on race or your sexuality. Which brings me to the final point of this episode, and that is that these universities have big civil rights lawsuits on their hands. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 says that private institutions and businesses which employ 15 or more people cannot discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. That's from Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, those 5 categories. So Jewish students have a big claim here under the 1964 Civil Rights Act to sue these private institutions because Jews are both, Judaism is a religion and Jews are also a people in addition to a religious group. And so those fit the categories as outlined in Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And so Jewish students can say to these universities, you have discriminated against us in the sense that you have not treated us equally. You have failed to enforce your own policies against certain offenders, whereas similar offenses directed at other groups have been vigorously enforced. So the argument is you are a private institution, you are beholden to the Civil Rights Act, and you are discriminating against us in the sense that you are not treating us the same as other people at this institution. Stay tuned. I'm making a prediction that there's a civil rights lawsuit coming for many of these universities in the imminent future. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that this episode was helpful in figuring out what the law says about free speech and, of course, what these speech codes at these universities say about free speech. It's such a sad time that we're living in, but if there is one glimmer of hope, it's that this is all coming out and we are finally seeing these universities for what they really are, and hopefully we can charter a better future going forward. I'll see you all soon. Take care.